Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. Specifically on this video, I'm talking about the new moon in Gemini on the 30th of May. But of course, I always look at the setting that it's in, and there are a lot of things going on at this particular time. First of all, just a little word about the new moon itself. The full moon always seems to be more interesting, doesn't it? And I think it for many reasons, but also because we can see it, and it's quite a large object in our night sky, so it gets our attention. And of course, things seem to come to the bubble quite a lot on a full moon, so it's always, as I said, just a little bit more interesting. But a new moon, even though we can't see it, is the sign of new beginnings, and we get new beginnings every month, in fact, actually 13 times a year. And that does give us an opportunity to kind of consciously engage with the idea of starting something new, starting a new cycle for ourselves. And it gives a little bit more power to our elbow. But as I said, you can't see the new moon, and that's because the moon's shadow, or the shadow side of the moon, is pointing towards Earth, which is why we can't see it. So without further ado, I'm going to take a look at the horoscope straight away, because there are things I want to point out in there with reference to this new moon in Gemini. Now, this new moon, as you can see, I've set it here for London. So that's in part because I like to see the focus that we're talking about very prominent in the circle. And here you can see the sun and moon side by side at the very top of the chart, near the midheaven, because it's set for, well, it happens at 11:31 UTC. You can adjust it accordingly wherever you are in the world. But as far as England is concerned, we're looking at this new moon high overhead, if only we could see it. The significant thing about this new moon is that it is sextile, or in harmony, with Mars and Jupiter, which you can see in the sort of 2 o'clock part of the horoscopic circle joined together. In fact, the day before the new moon, on May the 29th, Mars and Jupiter were conjunct exactly. So I'll talk about that in a moment. I think one of the things I want to say about the new moon as well, in terms of remember I said it's good to be consciously aware of starting new things. And really and truly, we get a 6-month cycle in play at the new moon, because the new moon in Gemini becomes a full moon in Gemini on the 8th of December. So that way we get a kind of feeling that the things we begin now, that we consciously engage in starting over, in doing things for the first time, they have a cycle which will finish in about 6 months' time on that full moon in Gemini. Now, this is particularly relevant if perhaps you're starting a new job or you're beginning a new relationship in this new moon early cycle, which means the next couple of weeks. Then, in 6 months' time, you're going to have a review of where you are. Is it a great job? Are you ready to go further into it? Or was it short and sweet and time to move on to new pastures? And the same, really, with a relationship. But yes, let's get back to that Mars-Jupiter conjunction. I mean, when you put Mars, the principle of action, desire, and drives, next to Jupiter, the principle of expansion and growth, you can see that this is going to be a good time for action and adventurous action as well. So we could say that the new moon is brought in, or the meaning of the new moon, that chapter brought in by adventurous action. And it can be quite a fortunate combination. It's quite lucky. But of course, in astrology, we have to look at the negatives as well as the positives. And the negative side to a Mars-Jupiter combination is Mars, meaning aggression, and Jupiter, meaning excess. We get excessive aggravation, excessive aggression. And of course, in the context of things going on in the world, that might not be a very good thing. And even though we can see the sun and moon in sextile to that Mars-Jupiter conjunction, don't get seduced into the idea, therefore it must be good, good, good. No, we're still uniting all these principles. The new moon with that Mars-Jupiter energy, which also must include that idea of excess aggravation, excess aggression. And that may be appropriate to sorts of things we're seeing going on in the world, but also to ourselves. We want to be moderate in our drives and our actions and desires, moderation in all things. So let's come back to me for a minute, because the other thing that I really want to talk about in connection with this new moon is the sign of Gemini itself. Now, if I said to you there are two signs that tend to be Marmite, people either love them or they really don't love them at all. You're ahead of me, aren't you? Yes, of course. One is Scorpio, because it's an extremely powerful sign, a sign of extremes. But the other one is Gemini. And they are connected, which I'll explain shortly. But first of all, I want to think about Gemini. Gemini is an air sign. So it's a sign strong on concepts. It's a thinking sign. And of course, it's a mutable sign, and the mutables are dispersive. So Gemini loves to disperse information, loves to talk, loves to know about things, loves to receive information and give it up, loves to gossip. It's a great sign for gossip. Have a penetrating mind, and it's very difficult to come off the better end of an argument with a Gemini, because they are fiendish in their ability to dart about and find edges and angles to things. I often say, when I'm thinking about the sign of Gemini, and perhaps if you're a Sun Gemini, for instance, or Gemini rising, you go into a cupboard every day and come out with a new costume. Geminis are the chameleons of the zodiac, very colorful, very creative and inventive in a really mental way, very mentally agile. But for that very reason, people find Gemini a little, a little concerning. They're never too sure who they're dealing with, which Geminis come out of the cupboard today. So that does make, especially the water signs, feel very, very uncomfortable. And the earth signs just get very irritated. So probably if you're from those groups, you would fall into that category that find Gemini difficult. But Gemini is a sign, really. What would we do without that kind of Gemini energy, for want of a better word? And we've all got it in our charts somewhere. And of course, this new moon in Gemini is a call to arms. Interesting, in light of that Mars-Jupiter conjunction, for us all to get our communicator hats on and start, bringing ideas into a forum and moving, traveling, all the sorts of things that we associate with that sign of Gemini. But I said I'd tell you about the link between Gemini and Scorpio, and the link comes through Mercury. Mercury rules Gemini. If you dig and delve into the myth of Gemini, or Hermes in Greek mythology, you know that Hermes ferried the souls of the dead to the underworld, to Pluto's territory. And he was the only god among the pantheon of Greek and Roman gods who could enter hell and come back out of it again. And he was the messenger between gods and man. Scorpio, of course, is the realm of Pluto, the lord of the underworld. So there is an affiliation with the sign of Scorpio and its ruler Pluto, because Scorpios love to get into the dark of things. What's hidden? What can we find in the riches of that kingdom of Pluto and bring out? Or what information, good word, can we come out with from the darkness? And Mercury, as a planet, the higher octave of Mercury is Pluto. Now, I know In some systems, that's not the case, but I think I've certainly used Pluto as a higher octave of Mercury. If you start with the sun, you go to Uranus, first of all, to the moon, you go to Neptune as its higher octave, and you come to Mercury, you go to Pluto. You go through the transpersonal planets to get that kind of higher octave meaning. So they are united. Mercury and Pluto have a kind of affinity, and Gemini and Scorpio have a certain affinity. And they're both signs that can travel into the darkness, sometimes with impunity, hands off. They're not harmed, they're not affected, but they will bring it out to the attention of everybody else. So when I think about this new moon in Gemini, well, we might think this is a good time to have a new mindset, to start thinking about things we need to communicate to other people. Maybe we need to start doing things of a very mercurial Gemini nature. Maybe we're traveling, maybe we're meeting a lot of people, all of that kind of Gemini stuff. But remember, there's this other side to Gemini. So we bring the dark side with us. So it's also a period of not just knowledge, seeking knowledge, delivering knowledge. When we think of knowledge, we think of intelligence. And what do we think about intelligence? We think of secrets, military intelligence, all that sort of thing. So we're in a period when all this is going to be highly relevant. And that new moon will bring something into awareness that has to do with intelligence, knowledge, communication, travel, you name it, all of that. And of course, as I said, I'll go through this sign by sign after I've taken us another little step into what I want to talk about this time. So let's go back to the horoscope for a minute. Let me show you something else. Now, next to the sun in this, also up by the vertical arrow, you'll see the sign for Mercury. Mercury is at 26 degrees of Taurus. And it is both sextiling in harmony with Neptune in Pisces, and it is also squaring Saturn in Aquarius. Now, I'm going to be focusing a little bit more about that than I am about the Neptune connection. But when we put Mercury and Neptune together, we get divine inspiration, but we also get deception, lies, conspiracy theories, all sorts of things that aren't quite true. Remember, we've got Mercury, our mythological god here, messing around in the underworld and coming out all tricksterish with information. But the one I want to concentrate on really, and actually before I do, just to talk about these recent months, we have seen so much in the area of disinformation, haven't we, and fake news and the use of social media to spread lies. And that is implicit in this particular setup astrologically, with Mercury connecting to Neptune here. But here we've got Mercury squaring Saturn, and it's very funny. I've been recording my audios for this week recently, and I found myself talking about, even though we've turned the corner and there are a lot of new kind of streams of energy, for want of a better word, coming into play, there's still a shadow over us. It feels as though there's a shadow. And I am going to be talking about shadows in a minute. But this shadow really comes from the close connection between Mercury and Saturn. Of course, Mercury, as you can see in this chart, is retrograde. But on the 3rd of May, then Mercury will turn direct. So it's in its sort of stationary period, as is Saturn, because Saturn will turn retrograde on the 4th. So these two planets, their connection with each other, 90 degrees of connection, and their symbolism, Mercury and Saturn, what I'm talking about in terms of there seems to be a shadow hanging over us. There's a pall over our lives in reference to this Mercury-Saturn square, which we can see quite clearly here. The thing is that, of course, Mercury hasn't quite got back as far as the square to Saturn, which is why it never returns exactly, even when it moves direct again. But nevertheless, it is in the orb of Saturn, as we say when we're talking astrology. So I want to come out of here again now, come back to me, and I want to talk about stationary planets. There's sort of various opinions on stationary planets, and also especially on retrograde planets. And there are some schools of astrology, some astrological minds, that think when a planet is stationary, it's not really doing anything. It's kind of stopped in its tracks, so it has no effect. And when it starts to move retrograde, then of course it's going to be diminished in its action. It's going to be weaker. But I have to say, in my experience, that's absolutely not the case. And I have spoken about other planets in their stationary state, that their properties are even stronger, more profound, supercharged. I use these words. So we are getting this picture at this time of both Saturn and Mercury. Their properties are supercharged. They're in square, they're supercharged. So what kind of information do they have to bring to us, which we are going to find difficult? Because the nature of Mercury and Saturn is not only to be realistic, but it's also to bring us difficult issues to deal with. And I think that's going to be a really strong pattern for this period of time, regardless of all the other things that I've talked about with adventurous energy, with the Mars-Jupiter conjunction and divine inspiration from Mercury to Neptune. They are all in there. They're all part of this package. But we have to give the edge to Saturn because it is stationary, turning retrograde, and to Mercury, which is stationary, about to turn direct. And I suspect in this first week of June, we're going to have a lot of things to deal with, a lot of things that perhaps we are finding hard to hear. Let's put it that way. And I mean that in our individual lives. And of course, certainly if you've got Mercury and Saturn playing into your natal chart, then you are going to be a little bit more plugged in to this kind of essence, this kind of aura of Mercury and Saturn. So what do we know about Saturn in particular? Let's take a look at this planet as it is stationary, about to turn retrograde. And we look at its keyword principles, which are constraint and construction. And so we get two very different feels, don't we? When we think about constraint and constriction, we feel everything has gone. But when we think about construction, we think about being constructive and building. And we need to remember Saturn in both these roles. But also Saturn has a lot to do with time and timing. Things come together in time with Saturn. When Saturn's in charge, things take time. Things have to be worked through carefully and consistently. And this is also something we all need to remember at this time. And of course, when we talk about time and timing, we think about time in terms of karma, how events come back to haunt us. Chickens come home to roost. And that is such a Saturnian kind of theme. And I'll be using that as I wrap up this video to you a little bit later. But I want to think of what Saturn represents in terms of mundane astrology, when we're looking at the world out there. When we think of Saturn as leadership, we think of it as government. We can think of it as the treasury. So finance comes into that as well. We think about law, rules and regulations. So we see when Saturn is all powerful, we have a lot of things to deal with in terms of perhaps governments taking action, draconian action with certain aspects of our existence trickles down to us. We see also leaders in difficulty. We may see leaders changed or ousted or resigned, gone. And so new leadership has to come in. And there's always a period of difficulty when governments are in transition or when people and places are in transition and trying to find a new set of rules or a new leader to lead them. So those are the things we need to be thinking about. But here we come with shadows again. And the shadow cycles of the planets are interesting. I tend to pay more attention to the shadow cycles of Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, Jupiter. Sorry, forgot you there for a minute. Because they're the bigger, more powerful kind of influences on us all, and they shape our world. The personal planets are personal, and maybe we have more relation to them, but it is the outer planets and the transpersonal planets that have the biggest effects that shape our world. So, in fact, when Saturn turns retrograde, it will turn retrograde on the 4th of June. And let me get this right, 25 degrees of Aquarius and 15 minutes. So then it will start moving backwards until it turns direct again. And in fact, it will be going back to 18 degrees of Aquarius and 31 minutes, where it was on the 26th of February this year. So we've got a beginning of this cycle, February 26th. The retrograde passage starts on the 4th of June, moves all the way back, and that's going to take the time between June the 4th and October the 22nd. So it's going to come back to that 18 degrees of Aquarius, 31 minutes on the 22nd of October. And from there, it's going to march past or march through until it goes right past the point at which it went retrograde, which it did on the 4th of June. And that will take us to January of next year. In fact, the 26th, no, where am I? Yes, the 26th of January. So that's a whole cycle in itself. And you can sort of try to pick it apart a little bit and think of the things that you encounter along the way from late February through to very early June. Some of the more challenging issues you faced, or the bigger things that you've done, the things that have made your mark or made a mark on your life. And we see you moving forward, or development of that up to June the 4th. From that point on, you go back over it. And so it may be that there are rethinks and changes on all of those things that you set in motion, or that you thought you had, nailed. Maybe you didn't nail them, but they've got to be re-nailed. So they've got to be reconsidered. And we sort of also look at world events, and let's not forget the importance here. When did Putin go into Ukraine? He went in on the 24th of February. So we have a really direct link between June the 4th-ish and, that 26th of February, the beginning of this huge Saturnian cycle. So it'll be interesting to watch the things that evolve, develop from that side of things every bit as much as we do from our own. Now, I think, as I mentioned a little while ago, there are some schools of astrology and astrologers who think, in their experience, believe that a planet is weakened when it's retrograde. And I don't think that at all. I think it's much more powerful. And I'm not alone, because Ptolemy also thought that. So I like to quote my ancestors, my forebears in terms of astrology. And I think, you have a chance to test this out. We do living astrology on this channel. You can take what I say and use it, investigate it, put it to the test. And it is going to be very interesting for you if you know that you have something at 25 degrees of the fixed signs, Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, and Scorpio, because Saturn will be connected to whatever you have there. And you'll be able to associate it with the events that occur around this time, your feelings. And remember, I think this is a good phrase to use with this Saturn cycle, is it's where you make your mark on life and the events that make their mark on your life. And also, wherever Saturn is involved in your chart, in your transits, as we're talking about it generally now in this important cycle, Saturn is a very material planet. It is about the material world. It's about the laws that govern the material world. So it's not airy-fairy. It's not like, oh, maybe this, maybe that. It's absolute. So we have to deal first of all, with our material concerns when we're faced with Saturn. But even if what we're facing is an emotional thing, is something in the realm of feelings, we still have to figure out how to handle it in our real world. And that's a very, very important thing to remember at this time, or at any time where you feel faced with difficult circumstances over which you seem to have very little control. And as I said, I'm going to be talking about that, as I wind up this video. But I'm going to move into what this all means sign by sign. And I'm going to start with Gemini, because the new moon is in your sign. The sun is in your sign. The moon is in your sign. So this new chapter is a new personal chapter. And of course, there are all sorts of different things that define a new personal chapter. There can be things that you want to do personally with your life and your ambitions, and you think about you and your persona. Is there something you want to change? You want to bring out a new dimension of you. And this can be as simple as doing something physically to your appearance. Is it, having a hairstyle change? Is it deciding to bulk up and do a bit of more kind of gym work? Or, what is it that you feel, I want a new look? But of course, that idea of a new look is also a new image. And if you work in an area where image is everything, it's absolutely time to revamp your image. Remember, Madonna does this, Virgo rising, Mercury rulership, and she does it so well. Well, she's Virgo. I can never remember which way around that is, but she's a Mercury person. And she reinvents her image time after time. And it does make a difference. Sometimes we think, well, what's that all about? At least it draws her to our attention. And our image changes do that. But it is time to get personal and to get personally behind the things that you want to have come about. And your personal stamp on things is very important. Get personal about things. Now, if we shift to your opposite sign, which is Gemini, which is Sagittarius, we've got the absolute opposite. So we have that new moon in the 7th house of relationships. This is where other people figure in your life. So we could just say straight off the bat, a new moon in the area of relating, a new relationship. But it can be a new stage of an established relationship. And it could be things like new contracts, because if you're working for a company, it may be that you annually review your contracts. So you sign up to be with this company in a new phase. And whether it's a relationship, a working relationship with someone, or it's a romantic relationship, the idea of having some new targets for yourselves as a couple is a wonderful thing. It energizes the relationship. It gives it a new face. It gives it some new energy. And that's a really good thing to consciously think about. But of course, sometimes things just happen in regard to a new moon in this area of your chart. It can be that somebody decides that you're the bee's knees, whether they think you're the perfect person for the job, or whether they think, I'd like to get to know you a little bit better. So we get new relationships starting, and they can be working relationships or intimate relationships or romantic relationships, however you want to think of that. And I think also, if perhaps you've been estranged or not getting on very well with certain people, using this new moon cycle, and remember that's a cycle of a fortnight, 2 weeks, it goes from new moon to full moon. It's a very good opportunity to try to rewrite the script of a particular relationship. Now, if we come to Pisces, we look at this new moon in the 4th house. Very, very important area of the horoscope. It's the beginning of everything, really. It's the foundations of life. It is the foundations of the future. It is our base in life. It's where we call home, but it's also our family. But I also like to use that word, the foundations of the future, because it means when that new moon occurs there, you can think in terms of putting in the building blocks of future enterprises, things that you want to grow, not necessarily things that will happen overnight, but things that are going to be relative to your future must have a beginning. And this new moon is your signal to get those new beginnings, those foundations in place. But of course, a new moon can mean new things, new chapters beginning on the home front, whether this means a new residence for yourself, whether it means new surroundings in the sense of doing things to your home that make it look different, however you want to interpret that, or whether it means new things for the family, whether you've got a new project that's going to involve the family, a special occasion, so you're all coming together for that gathering or that occasion. It can also mean a new member of the family, whether that's by birth or by marriage or just by somebody coming into the family as a new member of it. Everything starts at root level in this part of the horoscope. And if you think about that consciously, Pisces, the idea of starting things at root level, nourishing, getting those roots deep in the soil of whatever it is you want to do, you're going to go from strength to strength. Now, if we come to Virgo, it's the 10th house. It is all about my place in the world. You know, what I do when I pop myself outside my front door and I get out into the world. Can be the big world. It can mean, you know, the world of corporate life. It can mean the world of being on a stage, or it can be simply out there, but not at home. It's your role in life. And remember, a role can be what you do for a living, whether you're a cook or you're a dancer, you know, whatever you may be, or you can be a parent or a daughter, where all sorts of things are roles. We have many roles in life. So this 10th house is where all that is focused. And a new moon means a new role. Now, does it mean a new job? Yes, it could be. Does it mean a new role in your existing job? Yes, it could be. Does it mean that you're going to become a parent or a grandparent or something like that? Yes, it could do. But it also means, I think, this idea of a new chapter for your out in the world life. And it is, again, not quite the same as in the first house, which is very personal. But in a way, it's about creating new chapters for ourselves, things that we want to happen in our out in the world life, and consciously developing new things and doing new things. If we come to the fixed planet, it's fixed planets, fixed signs. I'm going to start with Scorpio. And we look at the 8th house here, that new moon in the 8th house. Well, that's your homeland, Scorpio, the 8th house, ruled by Pluto. So here you dig and delve. Here you go deep. You go right down to the center of the earth in the 8th house. And you might like to think of that in terms of your feelings, getting very, very deep. Or you might like to think of it in terms of getting to the truth, getting right to the core of something. And the new moon helps you begin a journey into the deeps. So you can think about that in the deeps, however you wish to use it. And maybe more than one thing. We talk about getting to the root of a matter. We talk about getting emotionally deep. And we can talk, because this is an area of intimacy, that the deeper we're prepared to go, and the gates to intimacy, the route to intimacy opens up. And that is a very, very powerful thing. We are reborn by our intimate connection, our sexual connection with people at a certain level. It's not necessarily a sort of quick fling, but when we really engage with someone, we really engage at a deep level, that is a kind of rebirth. So the new moon offers you that experience, that opportunity. It's also a money house, but it is more to do with other people's money. So here, if you're borrowing from a bank, you're borrowing other people's money, or you're sharing other people's money. So you have a contract with somebody that's a joint contract with money. So you can do that with a life partner or a business partner. So it suggests there's something new here, a new agreement being set up, or a new way to deal with financial responsibilities, all of that is a good thing. And remember not to just think about May the 30th when this new moon happens, but the new moon as it waxes up to the full moon 14, 15 days later, about a fortnight in length. So if we come to Taurus, then we're looking at the second house. And the second house has a lot to do with your value as a person. And a new moon, of course, brings a new element into play. And this whole idea of how much we value ourselves and what we have in terms of ourselves, and also what we have in terms of our material world. This begins a new season, and it might translate in terms of money. Maybe it's a new source of income, or it's a new way to work with the money that we have. But it may also be, sometimes we feel people don't treat us terribly well. And we feel, I didn't deserve that. I'm not being treated as I'd like to be treated. So you have to get inside and really figure out what it is that you're transmitting that isn't screaming loud and long. I am a person of value. So the new moon is an opportunity to up your value, start increasing your sense of self-worth. And that means really finding, remember I talked about Saturn being very material. We've got that Saturn in play as well. It may also be looking at the material gifts that you have, the way that you bring aspects of your being into the world in a real sense. And that may be your way to adding to your inner sense of self-value. Those two things are connected. If we come to Leo, we're looking at that new moon in the 11th house. And the 11th house, another very creative house, has quite a lot to do with combining your talents, combining your interests, combining your focus with others. It's about teamwork. It's about collaborations. But it has a kind of humanitarian seasoning to it, so that in the world we're living in now, we see so many reasons that our humanitarian spirit has been stirred. So we put a new moon in this area of your solar chart, and your humanitarian spirit is stirred. It may be time to get together with other people for the purpose of other people's benefit, of doing things that help them. And it's also about thinking about the things you do that have a bigger layer of meaning. It's not just about personal gratification. It's about, what does this do in the sense of the bigger picture? And I often think that we understand the 11th house, Aquarius, 11th house of the solar chart, a little clearer if we think about in the 10th house. It's about our place in the world and often what we do as a career. And that means where we put our material world together because we get paid for a job we do, and that gives us our material world. But there are other aspects to the job we do and the things we do out in the world. We want some kind of sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. We want to feel what we do, is helping other people somehow, or it's of benefit. It isn't just about money. It isn't just about doing the job. It's more than that. So yes, you may get a new opportunity to collaborate with people. There may be a new enterprise born. There may be a new or important get together. And often around this time, June, there are lots of kind of celebrations and fates and things happening in your neighborhood. And so you may be collaborating with people in order to bring that about. Looking then to Aquarius, and we think here of the 5th house, this is a very me house in the horoscopes, very creative. It's what we do of ourselves that we offer up to other people. And I would say there's a really direct connection here with the idea of romance and children, because the 5th house has a lot to do with offspring, romance, things like that, affairs of the heart. And we think, well, how do we produce children? Well, it's from an affair of the heart, we hope. So this is how we get connections in astrology and a stream of meanings for these areas of the horoscope. And so we think about this fifth house as being a supremely creative area. And I've talked a lot about getting creative is a way of getting active and managing to put into our life the things that give us a kind of energy and feel of a good feel. When we're involved, all of ourselves in a creative act, then, you know, it does something to our psyches and our systems that makes us feel better. So there is a new moon start up here. Is it a new affair of the heart? It might be. Is it a new a creative endeavor? It might be. And it's certainly, as I said, a very good opportunity to get creative. And although Aquarius, when you think about it, you are the sign of the great humanitarian, and there is a certain higher mind aspect to the sign of Aquarius. Well, funny enough, you're here in the fifth house, which is all about the me, the smaller self, the inner child, all these things. So it's just it's being stirred at the moment, and it's a good thing. To be fully rounded human beings, we need all aspects of ourselves to be acknowledged. And this is your time to acknowledge your inner me, your inner child, the me in your personality. So if we come now to the cardinal signs and we start with Aries, then we're looking at the third house. And in fact, all my next group are part of what I call the seeking houses. This is where we seek to do things, to find meaning, to have knowledge, to all sorts of different ways around those kind of themes. So this new moon for you is about spreading the word. Now, it may be that you need to talk to people, whether they're people you work with or whether they're people in your family and friends. You need to talk about your ideas. You want to get them out there so that we can build something with them. But it may also be the start of a period of learning. So maybe you're going to do a course. You're going to go away for a course. You're going to start university. You're going to, who knows what it may be, but learning and knowledge is attached to it. Or maybe you've been thinking about developing a platform on your social media connection. This is a good time to develop it, to start a social media platform of some description. And if you're interested in writing or anything which you want to get your message out to other people, this new moon is the time to get going. This is the time to communicate. May also be the time to travel, but it's a little bit more than just traveling. It's about getting your ideas out there. It's getting you out there. And so it might be getting you out in the neighborhood. And I've already talked about the idea of, lots of things going on in the locale at the moment, especially in England. At this time, we've got all the kind of big Jubilee celebrations. So there are a lot of things set up, street by street, town by town, city by city. And you may be involved in that. And that new moon is all about that as well. And it could also be that news delivered to you starts a new chapter. And remember when I looked at that Mars-Jupiter conjunction, which has a flavor into or of this new moon, and we're looking at adventurous new starts, but we're also looking at aggressive new starts. There's a little bit of a play here. You have to stand in the middle of that. When we come to Libra, we're looking at the ninth house. So the ninth house is the area where we go out to the world in the sense of different countries and people of different cultures. It's about knowledge of things that are a little esoteric, spiritual, kind of, not your daily knowledge, the facts of life. It's more than that. It's beyond that. It's an area of truth seeking, of knowledge seeking. So the new moon there could symbolize, rather as it might do in the third house, the start of a new course. But this new course would be linked to something rather broader and a little bit more aligned to things that aren't necessarily the essential ingredients of life. They're a little bit more rarefied than that. It'd be a great time to get moving on that novel, a great time to get your novel out to whoever needs to publish it or represent you in publishing. It's also a time, I think, of travel to distant places. So maybe you already know that because you've got some trip planned, or maybe you'll be in the process of planning a long distance journey at some other period of the year. And it's good to think in terms of your far horizons, because although we need to live in the moment, we all know that, we do have to have some sketch of what we hope to have in the future or where we want to be. And the ninth house really is about getting on with that 10-year plan. So that new moon is also an opportunity to look at that 10-year plan, to look at that stretching out into your future and start laying the foundations, getting on the trajectory for all of that. So our final two signs, and we come to Cancer and Capricorn. If we look at Cancer, we're in the 12th house. Now, remember, I talked about these houses, 12th house, 6th house, 3rd house, 9th house, as the seeking houses. So in the 12th house, we seek transcendence. We seek to get above the material world. We also seek to escape, and there's not quite the same inference, is there? Seeking to escape sounds like it's an easy way out, whereas seeking to transcend means to overcome and to get higher. And that's a good thing. So that new moon is about escapism and transcendence. It also can be about health, because this axis 6-12 is the health axis of the horoscope. So it may be you need to take a little bit more care of yourself. I mean, really and truly, when you think about it, Cancer, the sun is moving through your 12th house, which is a time of retreat. It's a time when you should cut down on doing a lot of things, on doing a lot of physical things, take a little bit more rest, look after your health, recharge your spiritual, your physical, your emotional and mental batteries. So this idea of the new moon there is a real kickstart to doing all that kind of stuff. It's very healing, can be a very healing new moon, but it's healing with a conscious awareness of doing things that actually contribute to your better all over health, spiritual and everything else. If we come to the 6th house and we look now at Capricorn, because that moon is in your 6th house here, this too is a seeking area of the horoscope. And here we're sort of seeking in a way to discover what makes things work. You know, it's doing the work of life. That's what we do in the 6th house. So it's discovering things that help us do the work of life. And it may indeed have to do with work. It's not quite career, which is 10th house. It's the sort of workplace and how we work in connection with our career, the systems we have by which we work. So that new moon may indicate a new system. That could mean a new computer system. It could mean a new work base, you know, working with new people into the setting of your work, and new ways of working. That's a very good way of looking at this. Or yes, it may be new work, period. But I think really with a new moon, it's also that idea of bringing a new influence to bear on the work of life that you do. And rather like the 9th house, where we seek to go out in the world somehow, and we seek to find knowledge from out there that we can incorporate in our life. I think in the 6th house, we want to know what our knowledge and our skills can do to the benefit of other people. The 6th house is a Virgo and area, and you know, when we have purpose and meaning attached to what we do for a living, then that adds a quality that makes it purposeful. So that new moon indicates a new start in that whole area of existence. So I think that's all 12 signs done. And therefore, that means it's time for my conclusion. And I told you that I was thinking of shadows a lot, and it just came up. I was starting to talk on my audios and mentioning shadows. And then as I looked at that Mercury-Saturn aspect and Saturn stationary retrograde, Mercury tied into that, I thought, there is a shadow over us. There is a pull over us. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be very individual, that we've got something in our personal lives that's making us feel sad, making us not very, not feeling very positive. But it's also a collective experience that things in the world are making us sad. But they're not only making us sad, they're making us anxious, so that we're worried about, what's happening. What does it mean? And we can do that in our own personal circumstances, and we can do it when we look out at the world and think, what is going to become of us? And Saturn has that kind of aura, or what I'm looking at, this shadow coming over our lives to some degree. But I also talked about Saturn in terms of time, things coming together in time, things coming about in time, in the sense of what goes around comes around, chickens coming home to roost. In other words, karma. And Saturn is the lord of karma. So there's a lot of karma going on at this time. And it's several ways to look at this, because it is sometimes convenient to look at the things that happen and say, and point the finger of karma at people and say, you see, what goes around comes around, you got your comeuppance. And we look out on the world stage and we think, how does that work? And I think we don't understand it too well, because karma is a living thing. We are creating karma every moment of our lives. That's why we need to be careful of the actions that we take, because we are building up karma for ourselves. Now, if you're like me, you get instant karma all the time. And I remember this right back from when I was 7 years old, which of course is a Saturn cycle, isn't it? For 7 years, gone around a quarter of its time. And I remember I lived across the road. I had two great friends across the road, but they had elder brothers who were absolutely evil. They were terrible. They were torturers. They tormented me. And I was really bullied, and I really hated ever seeing them. So anyway, one day I got an opportunity to get my own back. I was at a school fete, and one of these brothers was about to sit down on a deck chair, and I pulled the back of the deck chair out, thinking he'd just, fall to the grass, but actually he didn't. He trapped his fingers as he tried to prevent them. It's not a very nice story I tell about myself, but it was a great lesson to me. And guess what happened, as we all know? Yeah, he was hurt, but, it wasn't life-threatening, but I got punished. My parents were furious. I had to offer apologies to both sets of parents. I had to write letters. I was, put to bed early for 7 days, not allowed to watch my favorite television programs. I was punished. And I think it's kind of stuck with me that this is not a good idea to take revenge, because it will come back on you. Let the universe deal with that. It's much better. But karma is in operation all of our lives, all the time. But occasionally it becomes a kind of repository for anything we can't explain. I can't explain why I don't like this person, or why I don't get on with these people, or why this place is a horrible place for me. It must be karma. But we can't get in a time capsule and sort of go back to where that sense may have come from. Maybe we can take it on trust. But the more important thing is to try to work with what we've got, because that's why it's come up. The reason we've got a karmic situation isn't there just to be punished. It's there to learn from. And that is Saturn, the teacher of the planets, is saying, you may not like what's happened, but it's there for a reason, and you have to work with it and deal with it as best you can. And this idea of creating karma is a very important one to remember. And sometimes, human nature gets the better of us, doesn't it? And we want to fight back, but there's fighting back and fighting back. And I think what we're really looking at this incredibly important time that we're all living in is that, taking it upon ourselves to get back at the world, at whatever we may think, is a dangerous thing. And we may wish that karma would be seen on the perpetrators of the terrible things we see happen in the world. And it will. The universe will see to it. It isn't necessarily in our hands. So I think that brings me neatly to the end of this video, which I hope you've enjoyed. And I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time. In the meantime, take care.